Even if a person has not done an aveda, where it gets cut off completely. Or an aveda of misa b'deshamayim, shehu etzed azed levatolu k'hagavna, which is the aveda rachmana litzlan of etzed levatolu and so forth. Ela sha'ar avedas galos. He did smaller avedas, so he's not cut off. Now you have to remember, in Golos there's no real concept of being cut off. You don't die because the enechai is from klipa. The good news is you could do tshuva. You can reconnect yourself to kedusha, reconnect kedusha to its source, and therefore the mashma says you could even repair avedas of kadas and misa b'deshamayim. But even if you didn't do an aveda of kadas that requires an extreme tshuva to repair such a terrible state of being stuck in the hold of klip, nevertheless, every aveda causes a blemish and a wound in the neshama, the godly soul. Like for example, pkimas or psikas chavalandak, the wounding and the cutting off the thinner strands of the thick cord. Canal, which we had earlier, I believe that was in Perek Hey, right? If you have a thick cord that's made up of many, many thinner strands, that when you do every aveda, it cuts it just a little bit. So even though it's not kadas and misa, it is an inyan of cutting. So in times of the Beis HaMikdash, you're separated from the Eibishter. In the times of Golos, you're trapped in klip, right? Trapped in klip is worse than cut off, but the good news is it could be repaired. Says Reb Afa Beke, nevertheless, since they affect damage to the person, a lot of small avedas, it could create a blemish, like doing one big aveda. Many small avedas can affect a degree of trappedness in klipa, like as if you did an aveda of karas hamis. Even if it's only one aveda, but you did it many times. Pam Rabbis made many times. It can be as devastating spiritually. It could trap me in the realm of klipa. And the psychological way I like to say that was the desensitization effect. You lose your chush and ruchnis, that you have no interest. You don't feel a lakus whatsoever. One aveda, a small one, done many times, can be this effective. Like the Navi compares Hachatayim sins on and on my for like a cloud which blackens the light of the sun. As the Pasuk says, Machisi ka'av pishaecha, I've erased like a thick cloud your sins. In other words, the avedas are like a thick cloud that needs to be wiped away. Hey, avedas chamuras, this goes on severe avedas. Hamavdilim, which separate between the inner flow of life from the Eibishter's name Havaya, the nefesh alakis to the divine soul. So the Navi compares it to havdalas on and of v'chashuch, to the separation of a thick and blackening cloud, hamagel ben hashemish, which separates between the sun, la'aris v'adarim aleha al derech mashal, to the people who live, to the earth and the people who live upon it. So the pasuk says mechisi cha'av pisha. Cha'av means a thick cloud, which goes in Avedis, which is karas umisa. But then it says like a thinner cloud is your chata'is. Right now, pesha means something you do on purpose. Chet means something you do by accident. Here he doesn't translate pesha and chet as on purpose and by accident, but chamudas and kalas. You follow? Pesha means a big aveda, chet means a small aveda. Hey, avedas kalash adam dash ba'akeh, which a man tramples with his feet. Hamavdilim, which separate kavdason and kalva kolosh, like the separation of a thin and partially translucent cloud. Al derech moshe, way of example. So when you have a thick cloud, it's dark. You have a thin cloud, you can pretty much see the light of the sun. In this analogy, it may seem adam neged eir hashemesh b'chalein. If a person will put against the sun's light in a window, mechitas kalas v'kalushis, light and thin mechitas, but l'reiv ma'oid, many different thin levushim. Hey, ma'afilas, they will eventually blacken to a mechitza achas of a v'yeser, like one thick cloud and perhaps even more. Says the Rebbe v'kocha mamishu b'nimshul. The same is true in the nimshul. That there b'chol avenes she'adam dash ba'kevav. There are numerous avedas which people take for granted, and they say they're not such a big deal. What's the big deal? It's a small aveda. Umikoshkin, and certainly hamaforsomes medivir razal. So just like we spoke before about need to do tshuva, which is having rachmanas on your nefesh alakis and the Eibishter, and breaking the spiritual hold that klipa has on the person who's trapped in it through avedas, he says it's true of big avedas and it's true of small avedas. And he says umikoshkin, and especially hamaforsomes. There are very famous avedas which we call adam dash ba'akeva. We don't consider important, but the Chazal consider them very important. There are avedas which people take for granted. What's the big deal? And the Chazal say that it's like aveda zara shvichas dam. And he gives you 5 examples. Come here. If you close your eyes and you don't see a person who needs to give tzedakah, so the pasuk says about not giving tzedakah, You should guard yourself. There'll be something in your heart which is B'liyal v'gemer, that you're not going to give tzedakah. And the Alter Rebbe says, B'liyal is Avodah Zarah. So even though it's only a small Aveda, I didn't see that shnorer. I didn't see that poor man, but the Gemara calls it B'liyal. Okay, the second example is the person speaks shameful things about his friends. He lashon hara, that the Gemara says, and this the Rambam brings lahalacha tashkula kaved zol v'gelos shvichas damim. The Rambam compares, this is a Gemara and it's a Rambam, lashon hara to all three averos. So people, what's the big deal lashon hara? Fact of the matter is, it's a machisi ka'ov pisha. It's not a chan and chatisach. It says in Chazal, kill Eved Aved Zarah. Getting angry is like Aved Zarah. This is also brought in Rambam, and the real source for it is a Zehar. I won't go into it. That the Gemara says Gaiva is like Aved Zarah, which is Alter Rebbe says in Tanya Sof Perek Chabeis, V'kohen Rabbas B'Gemara, and many other things that just in the Gemara. And of course, V'talmud Teda can get kulam, and of course, learning Teda, which is equal to all the mitzvahs. That also the Gemara says, K'may Merazal, V'yitra Kadosh Baruch Aved Zarah, V'chol Hashem overlooked Aved Zarah. So here's 5 examples of Avedas that people call small that are actually huge, and even those Avedas that are taka small, but many of them accumulate to make a thick cloud, which creates a golus hashchina and a golus on the neshama, and you have to do tshuva for it. Which is why the Chazal will masak kishim shalamita. Lakaba loved al misas bezdin v'chol, took it upon yourself all the 4 inyanim of misas bezdin. This is a way to correct the small Avedas, which are compared to big ones. Avedas Zarah gerais and shvichas dam. Milvad, another reason why in Kishma Shalamita we say the Dalet Mises is because Shalpi Asad, because according to Kabbalah, if you make a wound in the Eibush, the letter of Hashem's name Yud, kill as Chayev Skila as if you Chayev Skila. Hey, if you made a wound in the letter Hey, kill as Chayev Sreif as if you Chayev to be burnt, or Beis Vav, kill as Chayev Hedek. The Vav is, gives a person a mystical equivalency of Hedek, or Beis Hey Achreina, kill as Chayev Hedek. And the last Hey, it makes a person liable for Rahman Lasan for the Inyan of Chenek. V'avatal Krishma, and not saying Shema, which is only a mitzvah say, is Pegim Beis Yud, the blemish of the letter Yud. So even though it's not an Aveda, but since the Pagam is in Yud, Api Kabbalah is Inyan of Skila, with Tefillin Beis Hey, Tefillin is in the letter Hey, V'sit is Beis Vav, with Tefillah Beis Hey V'chul. So there's 2 reasons why we mentioned the Dalet Mises, the Kishma Shalamita. First of all, because we do a lot of small Avedas that are shakal like Avedas, for which there is skill, seif, hereg, and chenek. And second of all, even failing in mitzvah saseh can make a pagam in these 4 oasis of Shem Havaya, which Api Kabbalah brings upon us these ancient. And the person with intuition and creativity can use the information I just gave you, says the Alter Rebbe, learn with the Shar Avedas v'chatoim, learn about other Avedas and other chatoim, or Bittul Teda can get cool, especially Bittul Teda, that you should never say an Aveda is too small for me to do tshuva. And what tshuva does is it breaks the stranglehold of klipa, and it resensitizes the person. Okay?